Hello everyone! August is over and it is time for my August wrap up and my September to be read. So these are all the books that I finished in the month of August, or that I started in the month of August, and all of the books I plan to read in September, hopefully. The first book that I finished in August I actually started in July, but that was Women of Letters, curated by Marieke Hardy and Michaela Maguire. This is a collection of letters written to all sorts of different people and objects by all sorts of different people. And it was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. Even if I didn't know who the author of the letter was, I really liked hearing all these different stories from people from all over the place. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next one I picked up, I actually finished in one day. I was really surprised how fast of a read it was, and that was Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother by Amy Chua. This woman is a Chinese American woman, and it's basically a collection of essays / a memoir about her experience raising her daughters in America as what she calls a Chinese mother method. So that means she forced her children to learn musical instruments, the piano and the violin specifically. She refused to let them hang out with friends after school or go to sleepovers. They didn't do any extracurricular activities other than the piano and violin, and they expected to get straight A's, that kind of thing. I think you've heard of that stereotype before. I found this really quite interesting, especially considering how informal the writing style was. I kind of expected to go into this, especially considering the hype around it when it was published, to be really defensive and really quite negative towards what she calls Western parents. But I actually really enjoyed the distinction between the Western and Chinese generalities that she made. And I really enjoyed hearing a very personal depiction of the actual effects that this parenting style had on her children. And even now, as more and more results are coming back in from studies to show that helicopter parenting actually really negatively affects the children in the long term, I just found this really interesting and I quite enjoyed it for a single day read. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up a book for one of my university classes, and that was Roxanna by Daniel Defoe. This is very, very similar to the story of Moll Flanders. The only difference is that Roxanna is quite rich and remained rich throughout the novel. If you've read any Defoe before, it's really quintessential of his time period and exactly what you'd expect, I suppose. But all in all, it was an alright story, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Opposite of Loneliness, Essays and Stories by Marina Keegan. This is a collection of essays and stories collected posthumously by her family. Marina Keegan was a graduate from Yale University in America, and she was going on to have a fantastic writing career for The New Yorker when 2 days after her graduation she was killed in a car accident. So these are stories and essays that she wrote for her newspaper, that she wrote just for fun, that she wrote for classes, all kind of things like that, that her family has gathered and published in one book. I was expecting this to be really inspiring and really thought-provoking and just really a fantastic read, but it is, in all honesty, a collection of stories and essays written by a 21-year-old American white girl. And in many ways, I found them really representative of that demographic. That being said, some of these essays were fantastic, and I definitely preferred them to the stories, just because they felt like more hard-hitting. But really, it was an alright read, and I just enjoyed being able to experience some of the writing of women in a similar position to me. They're young, they're university graduates, and they're hoping to pursue a career in writing. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Next is Death Sentence, The Decay of Public Language by Dawn Watson. This is a collection of essays, I suppose, about the linguistic decay of language through doublespeak and like political speak. Honestly, I found this really boring, and I disagreed with a lot of it because it kind of came across as this is a thing someone said and this is why it's bad. but didn't quite explain why it was so awful. It was more like jabs into the dark without really backing anything up, and it was a lot to do with American politics. Considering Don Watson's Australian, I was more interested in what he had to say about Australian politics, because I think in many ways Australian politicians are worse than American ones, and I wanted to see that distinction, but it really came across more as an Australian said something, but look how it compares to a much worse thing that an American said, and it was boring and I didn't enjoy it. So I gave Death Sentence 1 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was another one for class. This is The Memoirs of Emma Courtney by Mary Hayes. This was a really odd novel. It's told in letters that a woman writes to someone that she calls her son, and it's basically about how she falls in love with a man who doesn't love her back, and then she laments that for about 200 pages. It wasn't great, but look, it was fine, and I read it for class, so I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. Also for class, I didn't finish this book, but I did read a lot of the short stories in it. It's the Anthology of Colonial Australian Gothic Fiction, edited by Ken Gilder and Rachel Weaver. So like it says, this is a collection of Australian Gothic colonial short stories. I read a lot of them. I thought some of them were pretty funny actually, because they were written at the very beginning of the idea of Gothic horror stories, so they were quite simplistic in their ideas, and I mean none of them were particularly scary, because I guess they hadn't really figured out how to do that very well yet, but it was also a much simpler time. We didn't have things like CGI, so yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good, but I haven't read all of them yet, so hopefully later this year I'll read all of these stories and then I can give the whole collection a final rating. Then again for class, I read For the Term of His Natural Life by Marcus Clarke. This is a story that outlines the life of a convict sent from the UK down to Australia, mostly Tasmania, to build Australia. If you didn't know, Australia was founded on the back of convicts, and this details the life of one of them, Rufus Dawes. This story is definitely an epic. It takes place over something like 3 decades, and it was just really hilarious to me because it was originally published as a serial in a newspaper. Every single chapter is quite short and also really action-packed to keep readers paying attention each week. But it means also at the very end of the novel, everything kind of like comes together really cleanly, and I just found that absolutely hilarious because it's completely unbelievable, but it's really common in serial stories of that time. So I thought really it was quite funny at the end, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. The last one that I read for class in the month of August I haven't quite finished yet, and that is The Small House of Allington by Anthony Trollope. I'm finding this really an odd novel. It focuses minutely on the idea of marriage in the 19th century. Anthony Trollope as a narrator is really funny. He doesn't mind at all making comments about the society or about the people he's written as characters. It's a really interesting satire of the time period and the importance placed on marriage, but at the same time it's over 700 pages and pretty much only about marriage. So as for the month of September, I'm still at university until about the end of October, so I'm going to be doing a lot of reading for class mostly. So most of the books here, actually all the books here, are books that I have to read for class that I'm hoping to read over the next month to catch up on all of my reading for the rest of the semester. And honestly, doing a 4-unit workload is really too much for me to also be reading books for fun. So if I do read anything for fun, it'll be a huge accident, and I'm definitely not predicting it. So the first book I'd like to finish in September is The Small House of Allington by Anthony Trollope. I'm hoping to finish this week actually, because for this class I have a reading week, which means I don't have any classes. I'm just expected to finish this novel, so hopefully I will do that. The next one is Wake in Fright by Kenneth Cook. This is an Australian novel. It's quite short, but also the font is massive and has giant spaces in between each line, so I'm really confident I can finish this in a day or 2. Then I've got As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. This will be the first Faulkner novel I've ever read, so I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's supposed to be really quite intense, so we're dedicating a lot of class time to it, so that will be interesting. Then The Well by Elizabeth Jolly. This is an Australian novel. I'm really interested to read some Elizabeth Jolly's work because I never have before, but I do know that she does have the Elizabeth Jolly Prize, or there is one posthumously, so I'm just interested to see. She must be a pretty well-known Australian author. Then we've got Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This will be my second Virginia Woolf novel, and I'm really looking forward to it. I know a lot of people don't like this novel, but it's one of her most widely known ones, so I'm very much looking forward to this. Next we've got The Engagement by Chloe Hooper. I have no idea what this novel is about, but I think it's a contemporary Australian, and the cover is awful, so it doesn't set me up for enjoying this novel very much, but I have to read it for class, so we'll see how it goes. Next is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This is a very widely acclaimed novel. Alice Walker and Zadie Smith both rate it as their favorite novel of all time, and it's just a really pivotal novel in people of color writing, and I'm really looking forward to it, especially because this cover is absolutely beautiful. It's the 75th anniversary edition, and it's just got bees all over it, and it's beautiful. And lastly is The Last Tycoon by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is the last novel that he wrote before his heart attack, and it was actually unfinished upon his death. So it is an unfinished novel, and it'll be, I think, the first unfinished novel I've actually read. So I'm really looking forward to see how that affects the storytelling aspect of it without knowing how it's supposed to end. That might be really interesting. I think this cover is pretty weird with those people on the beach, but oh well, should be good. So there you go, those are all of the books that I read in August, as well as all the books that I hope to read in the month of September. If you're planning on reading any books in September, let me know which ones, or if you've read any of the ones that I've mentioned, please let me know what you thought of them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.